Hey guys! Tonight we begin with a story of stripes, stars, and a woman with a needle. So dim the lights, settle into your blanket, maybe a cup of tea beside you. We're drifting back to Philadelphia in the year 1776. The air smells of candle wax and gunpowder. Revolution hums quietly outside. And somewhere, in a tiny workshop, a woman named Betsy Ross is sewing. You've probably heard the story. She made the first American flag. George Washington asked her personally. She cut perfect stars with one snip of her scissors, and history was born. Beautiful, right? Also, maybe not true. Let's glide into that slowly. Betsy Ross was born Elizabeth Griscom in Philadelphia, 1752. A Quaker by birth, an upholsteress by trade. She stitched curtains, tents, flags, anything that needed a strong hand. And like most people in a revolution, she had more tragedy than comfort. She married John Ross in 1773. He died in the war just 3 years later. She remarried twice more, because in the 18th century, life expectancy and romance didn't always sync up neatly. By 1777, Betsy had her own upholstery shop near Arch Street. And we actually have proof she made flags, real payment receipts from the Pennsylvania Navy Board. So yes, she definitely sewed flags, just not necessarily the first American flag. Now the legend says George Washington himself visited her workshop, along with 2 other men, Robert Morris and Colonel Ross. They showed her a sketch for a new flag, 13 red and white stripes, 13 stars for 13 colonies. The stars, they said, should have 6 points. Betsy suggested 5 instead. Easier to cut, she said, with one snip of her scissors. She demonstrated, and they were impressed, because who doesn't love a well-timed origami trick? The story goes she stitched the prototype, presented it to Washington, and that became the flag of the new United States. Lovely story, right? Except it doesn't appear in any records until almost 100 years later. It first surfaces in 1870, when her grandson William Canby told it to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. He brought affidavits from family members. No drawings, no receipts, just memories passed down like bedtime stories. Meanwhile, there was another contender, a man named Francis Hopkinson, a signer of the Declaration of Independence and an artist. He actually filed an invoice to Congress in 1780 for designing the flag of the United States and, very on brand, asked to be paid in wine. They never paid him, of course. Some things never change. So what we really have here is a tangle of stories. A talented seamstress, a would-be designer, and a nation that, like its flag, was still being stitched together. The official description of the flag, 13 stripes, 13 stars, came from the Continental Congress in June 1777, but they never said how the stars should be arranged. So everyone just guessed. Some flags had the stars in circles, others in lines. A few in what can only be described as creative chaos. No 2 looked quite the same. It was democracy in textile form. If you imagine that, Philadelphia must have been a strange sight. A skyline of mismatched flags, each one claiming to be the official one. Like every tailor had joined a silent design competition. Still, the idea of a circle of stars, equal, united, that image caught on. And somehow, over the decades, people began to remember that pattern as Betsy's. Maybe she did it first, maybe she didn't. But history really likes a tidy story. Think of her again, sitting at her table, a candle flickering low, the faint creak of her chair. Outside, the city is rumbling with revolution. Inside, she's folding blue fabric. She takes her scissors, One neat fold, a single cut, and there it is, a perfect five-pointed star. Maybe it really happened that way. Maybe it didn't. But it's a nice story to fall asleep to. She lived a long life afterward, sewing flags for militias, forts, and ships. She outlived 3 husbands, died in 1836, and only decades later became a legend. When America turned 100 in 1876, the country was desperate for simple, heroic tales, and a kind, brave seamstress, perfect. She became the nation's founding mother of the flag. The irony, of course, is that she probably never knew she'd become that. So tonight, as you drift, remember that some of the softest legends are stitched from the thinnest threads. Maybe she made the flag. Maybe she just made flags. Either way, she left her mark. When you're ready, we'll float into part 2, where the flag starts to multiply, mutate, and take on its own life.
Welcome back, sleepy historians. If you're still awake, congratulations. Tonight, we keep floating through the stitched-together history of the American flag. It didn't stop with Betsy Ross's supposed design. Oh no. The flag kept changing, over and over and over again. See, every time a new state joined the Union, someone had to figure out where to put the new star. And for a country that couldn't agree on anything, that meant a lot of experimentation. There were circular stars, starbursts, checkerboards, rings inside rings, and patterns that looked like something you'd see on a really patriotic tablecloth. At one point, there was even a version where the stars formed a giant star made of stars. A bit much? Yes, but also deeply American. The early decades were basically a free-for-all. There wasn't one single official flag design, just a general idea. 13 stripes, some stars, arrange them however your imagination and needle allowed. In 1795, they added 2 new stars for Vermont and Kentucky. And because symmetry is a cruel mistress, they also added 2 new stripes, 15 total. It looked fine until more states kept joining. At 20 stripes, things got visually exhausting. The flag started to look like an overcomplicated barber's pole. So, in 1818, Congress quietly decided to go back to 13 stripes forever, one for each original colony. From then on, they'd only add stars. Each new state was supposed to get its star on the 4th of July after being admitted, which means the flag would technically update once a year. But you know how humans are. Flags were always made early, or late, or just creatively improvised. During the War of 1812, the 15-star, 15-stripe version flew above Fort McHenry in Baltimore. That's the one that inspired Francis Scott Key to write the Star-Spangled Banner. He saw it through smoke and cannon fire at dawn, somehow still flying. Romantic, yes, but the flag itself? Huge. 30 by 42 feet. Basically a textile skyscraper. It now sits in the Smithsonian, stitched, patched, and slightly tattered. A reminder that even symbols need mending sometimes. As America grew westward, the number of stars climbed steadily. 20, 21, 24. By the 1850s, it was getting hard to fit them all neatly. Flag makers started experimenting with multiple rows, like starry spreadsheets. The patterns got mathematical, the symbolism poetic, and the sewing increasingly exhausting. During the Civil War, things got weirder. The Confederacy made its own flags, because of course they did. The first one, the Stars and Bars, looked confusingly similar to the Union flag. So much so that soldiers kept shooting at the wrong side, which is, historically, a bad sign for your branding. They switched designs several times after that, but nothing quite matched the power of that simple Union pattern. A rectangle of blue, a scatter of stars, and the stubborn promise of unity. After the war, new states kept joining. Each one brought new arguments about how the flag should look. There was no centralized design authority, just thousands of proud, slightly opinionated flag makers. By the time the U.S. hit 48 states, designers had tried nearly every geometric pattern imaginable. You can almost imagine them sitting at a table, tired, half-blind from sewing, muttering, "How many stars is it now?" Then came Alaska in 1959. That added the 49th star. And finally, Hawaii in 1960, which brought us to 50. The design was chosen from over 1,000 submissions. Not from a general, not a designer, but a high school student named R.G. Heft. He sewed the stars himself for a school project. His teacher gave him a B-. The government, however, gave him history. It became the official design on July 4th, 1960. Still used today. Simple, balanced, and, for once, symmetrical. It's funny, isn't it? The flag that people now treat like a sacred relic was basically a community craft project that evolved through centuries of chaos, compromise, and creative stitching. Each version meant something different. The 13-star flag whispered rebellion. The 15-star flag sang survival. The 50-star flag just hums quietly with bureaucracy. But that's how countries age. They get more organized, more complicated, less poetic. So next time you see the stars and stripes rippling in the wind, remember, it's less of a perfect design and more of a long collective doodle, drawn, stitched, and argued over by generations of humans trying to turn chaos into cloth. Hey again, if you're still here, that's impressive. You've survived 2 entire parts of textile-based history. So now let's drift quietly into the corners of the story, to the women who stitched America together, but never made it into the paintings. Because Betsy Ross wasn't the only one, not by a long shot. Philadelphia alone had dozens of flag makers, all women, most nameless now, working in small rooms by candlelight, stitching fabric they could barely afford to own. There was Rebecca Young, who made military flags before the Revolution. Her daughter, Mary Pickersgill, sewed the enormous banner that flew over Fort McHenry, the one Francis Scott Key wrote about. Mary made it in her house, helped by her daughter Caroline and 2 black women, Grace Wisher and Eliza Young. You probably haven't heard their names, because history tends to snip away the extra threads. The contract paid $405, a fortune if you didn't count the sleepless nights. The flag was so big they had to spread it across the floor of a brewery to finish it. Imagine that, a banner of freedom stitched between barrels of ale. There's something perfectly American about that image. Other women followed, stitching standards for militias, forts, and ships. Their work was everywhere, but their names disappeared into the seams. In the 19th century, as factories rose and wars came and went, flag making became a business. And like most businesses in that era, it quietly relied on women. Sewing, cutting, dyeing, repairing, thousands of hands, calloused and invisible. By the Civil War, seamstresses were producing flags in every major city, some Union, some Confederate. Each side convinced their cloth was the real one. It's poetic, in a sad way, that the same gentle skill that once united a revolution was later used to divide a nation. After the wars, patriotic women's societies took over. The Daughters of the American Revolution, the Ladies' Aid Societies. They preserved flags like relics, stitched replicas for parades, and argued about fabric authenticity with the intensity of theologians.
You can almost hear them. That's not the original weave, Margaret. And through it all, the image of Betsy Ross kept growing. Simpler, softer, easier to sell. She became a symbol of domestic patriotism, the perfect blend of motherhood and myth. By the early 20th century, her story was in textbooks, illustrations, and tourist brochures. A kind woman in a white bonnet, sewing the flag by candlelight while George Washington nods approvingly nearby. A scene that never actually happened, but one that everyone preferred, because the truth is messier. History usually is. Flags weren't born from inspiration. They were commissioned, paid for, sewn by working women trying to make rent, not legends. They lived quiet, unrecorded lives, and then disappeared, leaving behind the symbols we still salute. It's strange, isn't it? That a piece of fabric can outlive everyone who touched it. The stitches fray, the colors fade, but the story remains, stitched tighter with each retelling. If you've ever looked at the American flag and felt something, pride, nostalgia, confusion, remember that feeling was handmade, not by generals, but by women with sore fingers and borrowed needles. So tonight, as the stars blur in your eyes and the world grows quiet, picture those hands, cutting, stitching, folding, turning scraps into symbols. The flag didn't make America, the women did.